After about 20 chapters of build up, we are finally learning the truth about King Carol's death, and as it turns out, things might be a bit more complicated than we all originally thought. As well as the big reveal that on that very same day, we learned that Shanks was also on the island, and he has his own indirect reveal in the chapter that might have legitimized a major fan theory. And most importantly, Luffy makes Loki a very important offer that he can't refuse. But first, I want to talk about the very funny exchange we got in the beginning of the chapter, because even before I got to read 1152 myself, I've seen the war this has caused online between the Zoro and Sanji fans. Not that it really takes much to cause the two groups to go at it, much like the dynamic between their favorite characters, they're always ready to go at each other for even the smallest reasons. But I'll admit, this is definitely one that I can understand them having key debates over. So, coming off the ending of the last chapter, Luffy and gang finally realize something big is happening in the Sun Realm after feeling an intense burst of Conqueror's haki and are ready to step in. But before they go off to help fight Emo and the Holy Knights, Gaban warns Luffy that he'll need to use his Conqueror's haki to fight against them due to it being the only thing that can cut off their healing. Well, he doesn't so much tell him that exactly, at least not in the translation I read. He's much more vague about it. But despite his vagueness, Luffy does seem to understand what he's getting at, so this might be a situation where the fan translation didn't correctly convey what the scene showcased. Which, depending on the official translation, might be a similar case for what happened with the next big haki reveal. Because we get this hilarious moment where Gaban mentions that Luffy is not the only member of his crew who's able to use Conqueror's haki, at which point Sanji immediately jumps up, assuming that it's him. And dude, I love how excited Sanji gets over the idea that he had this hidden power that he wasn't aware of, and that he finally got one over on both Zoro and Jinbei to make up for the whole 4th place thing, which made it even sadder when Gaban completely ignored him and pointed out Zoro instead. And look, I'm a Zoro fanboy. He's been my favorite character since he was introduced into the story, and he'll likely continue to be my favorite all the way to the end. But despite that, I still felt the pain for Sanji in this moment because he is once again taking a major hit to his pride. And this is like the 3rd time since Wano ended, the first being when the crew got their new bounties and he was booted out of the top 3 in favor of Jinbei, and the second at the end of Egghead where despite his promise to do so, he failed to save Vegapunk. So yeah, our boy is desperately in need of a win here. Now to be completely fair, in the translation I read, Gaban never denies that Sanji is also a conqueror. He just specifically states that Zoro's body is already accustomed to using it, despite Zoro himself not being aware of the fact that he has the ability, something which even Luffy was able to pick up on, and which I thought he realized back during a raid on Onigashima when Kaido literally told him that he had it. I don't know, I guess this was one of the cases where it was Luffy's turn to have the one brain cell the two of them share. Also, I like how Gaban lays into Zoro for unknowingly using the ability, because we very rarely get to see Zoro ever beat his humble, and even though he is my favorite character, every now and then when he's doing something dumb, I like to see him be knocked down a peg. But again, this scene doesn't necessarily confirm that Sanji doesn't have Conqueror's haki. Gaban just says that Zoro's body is used to using it due to the few times he has unknowingly. Sanji still has the possibility to unlock it, especially if he does end up battling one of the 2 remaining Holy Knights, since having access to it would be the only real chance he has of defeating them. Though, even if he does unlock it in this arc, he likely won't be able to use it in the same fashion that Luffy and Zoro do, since Luffy has the experience to fine-tune and infuse his haki into his attacks like Gaban did, and Zoro has Enma to make up for his lack of mastery. So likely the best case we can ask for with Sanji is for him to accidentally unleash a Conqueror's Blast to cut off their healing, and then go in with his attacks. But mark my words, if Sanji ends up fighting either Killingham or Summers in this arc, he's unlocking Conqueror's haki before it's over. And while we're on the subject, I'm just going to throw my predictions out now. Once we get this group into the Sun Realm, we'll have it split up like this. The new Giant Warrior Pirates will face off against the Demonized Giants besides Dory and Broggy. Zoro will face off against Summers since his sword will be needed to free the kids from the thorns. And Sanji will be the one to fight Killingham because, well, he's the only one left. I'll get to the other 3 major characters later, but for now, those are my predictions for how the battles will start in the second half of this arc. Also, now that we've gotten the answer as to how to knock out the Holy Knight's healing, it kind of feels like Chopper's intentionally being sidelined here. His whole reason for following Gaban in the first place was to learn how he was able to actually damage someone who was supposed to be immortal, is why he didn't even think twice about jumping out the branch after him. But now that he's learned that Conqueror's haki is the key, there's not really much he can do with that knowledge. He can't make a drug or poison that can emulate haki and allow the others to fight too, so instead, he's being left behind in the underworld to treat the retired pirate. And this is coming directly off him hiding inside Soul's beard while the giant fought Summers, and somewhere when Robin took on the Holy Knight herself. I was never exactly clear on where Chopper was during that fight. I mean, he had to be somewhere close by because he watched the whole thing go down, but I, for the life of me, couldn't point out a spot he had been able to hide in during that fight. Point is, though, that it really feels like Oda just didn't have a plan for how to use Chopper this arc, so he's been finding excuses to keep him out of the conflict. Or even worse, he had a plan for him, but chose to scrap it. Maybe in the future, in between arcs, Chopper can use this reveal to somehow find a way to even odds against any future Holy Knights they have to face. Or better yet, when they get around 2 against the Gorosei, now featuring Papa Garland. But for now, he is being left behind alongside Gerd, and once Luffy, Loki, and Harwin leave the underworld, we likely won't see him again until the end of this arc. I really hope that I'm wrong about that. I hope Chopper gets to have a big moment during this arc, but odds are currently not in his favor and will continue to drop the further in we go. The only thing that has even lower odds at this point is Loki actually taking Luffy up on his offer, because our very wise captain, in an attempt to convince Haruden to free his brother, offers Loki a spot on his crew. That way, if he joins, as technically Haruden's leader, he won't be able to deny Luffy freeing one of his own crewmates. And I really feel like this is half Luffy just trying to force Haruden to free Loki, and half him being serious about the offer. Because in the very short time the two have spent together, Luffy has examined Loki, looked him over from top to bottom, and determined that all in all, he's a good dude. A little rough around the edges and extremely violent, but still worthy of being a member of his crew. But then again, Luffy also thought the same thing once about a zombie tree, so his standards aren't really that high. And odds are, just like the tree, Loki is not going to take Luffy up on this offer. I mean, he already did flat out reject him just a few panels later, but so did most members of the crew when initially asked, so that's not exactly the best evidence of him not joining. But realistically, I don't think joining Luffy is the trajectory that Loki's story is currently heading in. I think his end goal is actually staying here on Elbaf and regaining the trust of his people. In fact, once we get the 2 princes in the Sun Realm, I believe their roles in this arc will be battling Dory and Bragi, the 2 princes who were denied the throne, fighting off against the giants who are trying to forcefully take it. And once the battles are over and the dust is settled, he will renounce his rightful claim as the true heir to the throne in favor of promoting his brother as the new king, while he takes on a more advisory role, helping the giants continue their warrior culture while also embracing the more peaceful one his father dreamed of. A mixture of the 2 cultures, which I kind of feel like has been Oda's message this entire arc as what's best for Elbaf, and with the 2 princes working together, they'll be able to achieve it. Not to mention, I doubt Oda wants to deal with the logistics of having a giant travel with the crew despite not being able to fit on board the Sunny, especially a giant that dwarfs most other giants. That being said though, I could be completely wrong. I mean, I was also certain that Carrot was going to join the crew by the end of Wano and had all the evidence in the world for her to do so, only for Oda to say no. So he could choose that having Loki join the Straw Hats is just funny enough to override all the reasons that he shouldn't. I think it's really going to come down to the ending of this arc and how Loki reacts to Luffy's battle against the emo-possessed Gunko, and whether or not he comes to see Luffy as someone who he can achieve his dream with. And for that matter, we also need to kind of discover what Loki's dream actually is, but there is still plenty of time for that, especially since we just entered a flashback. Or I guess I should say yet another flashback, because in case you forgot, our current interactions with Luffy and co is already technically a flashback, as the events of chapter 1150 had taken place ahead of where we currently are in this chapter. But yeah, after 20 chapters of build up and a little nudging for Gaban, we are finally getting Loki's side of the story about King Carol's death. And look, this flashback has already completely changed what I thought the truth was going to be. Because starting with Shank's portions of the event, we see him and Gaban reminiscing about the good old days while taking a bath, and we end up learning 2 very important things. First, the symbol that we saw on the armbands of the Holy Knights, the circle with the cross marks through it, is tattooed on Shanks' left arm, likely meaning that this is the abyss symbol needed to travel through the summoning circles. Also means that during Shanks' time with his biological family, he was likely undergoing the training necessary to become a Holy Knight, but after learning certain truths about the World Gov, chose to break free from his heritage in favor of being a pirate again. And it's those very truths that lead to our second big reveal, that while in Marijoa, he actually met King Carol and came to Elbaf at this time to warn him about working alongside the World Gov, because they were keeping a major secret from the giant that would completely change his opinion about joining them. Unfortunately, Shank spent a little too much time catching up with his old crewmate, as before he gets a chance to speak with the king, we cut over to Loki's perspective as he and Girl find his father being skewered alive by his own guards. And this right here is what drew me for a loop with this flashback. Because at first glance, it seems like Oda is portraying Carol as going on a rampage and it taking all the soldiers we see here in order to stop him. And that's why he has Harold shrouded in silhouette instead of showing us his full design to make him seem that much more demonic. And this, combined with the things we learned from Emu and the Holy Knights throughout this arc, are supposed to put in our heads the idea that he was working with the World Gov, maybe even willingly making one of the deals we seen Emu force upon Dory and Bragi. But what doesn't sit right with me is the way the guards around the throne room seem to be acting. Because as Loki and Jarl get closer to it, they can hear some kind of commotion from inside, and yet the guards around them act as if nothing is wrong. The guard directly in front of the door even tries to delay their entry before Loki just kicks him out of the way. So, what if the guards, whether intentionally or forcefully, were the ones that took Emu's deal and betrayed their country by killing their king? That would explain why Loki went on his blind rampage and killed all of them, but didn't kill Jarl. And also why he left the island a few years later, because he was hunting down the fruit that the demonized giant stole from the throne room and gave to the Holy Knights. The only thing it doesn't really explain is why Loki would keep quiet about what really happened for all these years. But Oda does sort of take care of that prior to the flashback starting, as he does mention that he doesn't want to recall the events of that horrible day. Not really the best answer, but perfectly in line with the reasoning a One Piece character would have. Anyway, it's going to be a couple of chapters before we discover how accurate my theory really is, because this first flashback is actually the end of the story. And we immediately start up a second flashback going 100 years into the past to show us the life of a young King Harold, and how he went from a monster rampaging through the seas to the respectable king we heard he was from the rest of the giants.